West Africa just staged a funeral, and the body inside the coffin is ECOWAS. For decades, it was celebrated as the symbol of African unity. Yet today, the very leaders it claimed to represent are the ones lowering it into the ground. The shock? The undertaker isn't an elder statesman, but a 37-year-old captain from Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traoré, standing at the grave with Mali and Niger by his side. The reversal? What the West sold as integration was nothing more than a leash, and the twist? The leash just snapped in broad daylight, and the masters are panicking. Now, before we go deeper, let me ask you something. Where are you watching from right now? Drop it in the comments, and tell us, do you see Africa's fight for sovereignty as history repeating, or history finally changing? Your voice matters here because this channel isn't just analysis, it's a conversation. By the way, welcome to Africa Daily Good News. If you're new, think of us as your direct lens into the African story. Told straight, without the filters of CNN or Reuters. And if you're from the US watching this, yes, you're part of this story too, because the choices made in Washington ripple straight into Ouagadougou. So stay with me, because after decades of promises, betrayals, and broken dreams, ECOWAS has finally been unmasked. And now, we begin where every drama begins, with the illusion. ECOWAS was born with applause, but built on a contradiction so sharp it almost feels like satire. It claimed to unite Africa, yet its foundation was poured with cement imported from Paris. That paradox alone explains why its walls were always cracking. Back in 1975, Western powers pitched ECOWAS as a shining bridge across West Africa. But in truth, the bridge was designed so the traffic only flowed one way. Resources out, influence in. And people didn't notice at first because the structure looked solid on the outside. The illusion of unity hid the reality of dependence. Think about it this way. Americans often say a house divided cannot stand. But what if the house was never yours to begin with? What if it was rented out under your name, while someone else collected the checks? That's the story of ECOWAS. Africans called it our organization, yet the fine print kept sovereignty on lease. I remember a retired teacher in Ouagadougou telling a journalist years ago, "ECOWAS talks about our future, but it never feels like they're talking to me." His voice cracked not from age, but from the weight of decades spent watching leaders smile on TV while nothing changed on the ground. And that short story echoes a familiar feeling. People anywhere, whether in Ohio or Ouagadougou, lose trust when the system talks big but delivers small. And here's the twist hidden inside the twist. ECOWAS didn't collapse because outsiders attacked it. It collapsed because insiders finally stopped pretending. Leaders young enough to see through the costume stripped off the mask, and the crowd gasped, not in shock, but in recognition. They already knew. So the first stone of this drama isn't about rebellion, it's about exposure. Once the curtain fell, people saw the stage for what it was, a performance directed elsewhere. And when that realization hits, you don't go back to clapping. You walk out of the theater. And that walkout, bold, noisy, unapologetic, leads us straight into the next act. 3 countries walked out of ECOWAS in broad daylight. That wasn't just unusual, it was unthinkable. For decades, no one dared to defy the bloc. But suddenly, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger didn't just resign quietly. They slammed the door so hard the echo reached Paris. The official reason was simple. ECOWAS no longer served African interests. Yet underneath that statement lies a deeper truth. These nations had grown tired of being treated like misbehaving children whenever they tried to control their own resources. The twist is that what looked like rebellion was, in fact, self-rescue. And here's where it gets human. People everywhere know the moment when enough is enough. In American workplaces, for instance, surveys show that once employees feel their bosses stop listening, turnover spikes. Human beings, whether in Texas or Timbuktu, won't stay at a table where the rules are rigged against them. ECOWAS became that rigged table, and the walkout was inevitable. I remember a story from Niamey. A young shopkeeper told a reporter, "ECOWAS punishes us for choosing our own path. Then they tell us it's about democracy." His hands were dusty from unloading bags of rice while he spoke, and that detail matters, because it shows how ordinary lives, not just presidential speeches, fuel the breakaway. And yet, there's a subtle irony here. By leaving, these nations were accused of destroying African unity. But the deeper twist is that unity wasn't destroyed. It was exposed as fake all along. The performance ended. The stage lights cut off. The actors walked away. And when the audience realizes the play was never written for them, they don't beg for another act. They head for the exit too. So the walkout isn't just politics. It's a mirror. It forces us to ask, when do people finally push back? And maybe for you, watching from the US or Europe, you felt that same tipping point in your own life, at work, in a community, in a system that promised fairness but delivered control. Drop a comment below. When was your breaking point? If this perspective resonates, hit subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Because this story isn't slowing down, it's building towards something far more explosive. And you can feel it, can't you? The tension is already rising. Democracy was the word ECOWAS loved to shout the loudest, but somehow it always lost its voice when the wrong people bent the rules. When presidents in Côte d'Ivoire and Guinea rewrote constitutions to extend their stay, ECOWAS didn't blink. No sanctions, no outrage, not even a raised eyebrow. The silence was deafening. Then came Traoré in Burkina Faso, backed by hundreds of thousands in the streets, speaking directly to the youth, demanding sovereignty. Suddenly, ECOWAS remembered what democracy was supposed to mean. They punished, they sanctioned, they screamed. And here lies the contradiction so sharp it cuts twice. The ballot mattered only when it served Paris. This isn't just politics, it's psychology. Human beings everywhere know hypocrisy when they see it. According to surveys, most Americans lose trust in institutions not when they fail once, but when they apply rules unevenly. If fairness is selective, legitimacy collapses. And that collapse isn't abstract, it's personal. People feel it in their bones. I recall a university student in Bamako telling a visiting reporter, "If democracy is only real when foreigners say yes, then it's not democracy, it's theater." He spoke while holding a small notebook, pages full of half-written dreams about engineering and technology. His frustration wasn't just with politics, it was with a future that felt stolen before it even began. And maybe that's the real twist. ECOWAS didn't just lose credibility with leaders, it lost the next generation. Once the young see a referee who only calls fouls on one team, they stop respecting the game. And once respect is gone, the players don't just walk off the field, they build a new one. So the hypocrisy wasn't a detail, it was a trigger. It flipped the switch from suspicion to defiance. And that defiance is now feeding something bigger, something stronger, an energy you can almost hear building like thunder in the distance. Money was supposed to be neutral. In West Africa, it became a weapon. The CFA Franc, backed by the French Treasury and enforced through ECOWAS, tied 14 nations to rules they never wrote. On paper, it looked like stability, but in reality, it was dependency dressed up as order. The paradox? Stability for Paris meant stagnation for Africans. For decades, gold left Burkina Faso, uranium-powered French reactors from Niger, and profits streamed into European markets, while the villages producing those riches stayed dark at night. And when Sahel leaders finally said no, when they started renegotiating contracts and demanding that wealth serve their people, ECOWAS didn't clap. It threatened. And here's the twist inside the twist. The more these nations invested in themselves, the more they were branded as dangerous. This dynamic isn't hard to understand if you zoom out. In America, most workers expect that if they put in the effort, the paycheck reflects it. Studies on workplace motivation show morale collapses when employees see their labor feeding only the executive suite. People will endure hardship, but not exploitation without reward. The same principle applies here. Once citizens realized their national labor only filled foreign pockets, patience evaporated. A miner in Bamako told a local reporter, "We dig the gold, but our schools are still made of mud." His words were plain, almost quiet, but they carried the weight of a whole country's exhaustion. And when exhaustion turns into clarity, something powerful happens. People start imagining what life could look like if the chains came off. And maybe you felt a version of that yourself. Ever notice how once you see the pattern of unfairness in a job, in a system, you can't unsee it? That's the moment you begin to step away from compliance and toward defiance. And once you step, others follow. So the story of money here isn't technical economics. It's human psychology. Dependency dressed as cooperation always collapses because human beings eventually reject the lie. And in West Africa, that rejection has already begun to roar louder than the bankers in Paris. The ground is shifting, and the weight of that shift is pushing the story from coins and contracts to something even more unstoppable. West Africa is the youngest region on Earth, yet for decades it's been ruled by the oldest ideas. That tension finally snapped. The median age in Burkina Faso is under 20, but the man at the helm, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, is only 37 himself. The leader looks more like the people, and that changes everything. The shift isn't abstract. Young Africans are no longer content to inherit broken promises. They've watched ECOWAS leaders grow rich while their own classrooms ran out of chairs. They've seen foreign troops build bases while local roads collapsed. And once that picture becomes clear, loyalty evaporates. The irony is sharp. The bloc meant to secure their future ended up convincing them to fight for it themselves. This connects to something universal. In the US, surveys show that once millennials realized home ownership might slip permanently out of reach, their politics shifted dramatically. People everywhere recalibrate when they sense a stolen future. If the ladder looks broken, they stop climbing and start building a new one. That's what's happening in the streets of Ouagadougou, Bamako, Niamey. Marches full of young faces chanting not for theory, but for survival. One young woman in Burkina Faso, interviewed at a rally, held a handmade sign that read, "This time, it's ours." Her voice cracked as she shouted, but her grip never loosened. That's the essence of this generational quake. Fear mixed with determination, fragility welded to defiance. And here's the deeper twist. The same youth who once tuned out politics are now the driving force behind sovereignty. The generation that was told to wait its turn decided to rewrite the line instead. Once that energy is released, no sanction or headline can cage it. So the youthquake isn't just noise, it's direction. It's anger crystallized into vision, and like a rising drumbeat, it pushes the story forward, demanding a response from powers that never imagined the beat would grow this loud. Western panic doesn't whisper, it screams. Each time the Sahel talks about sovereignty, headlines from Paris and Washington shout instability, as if independence itself were a threat. The strange irony is that the louder Africans stand on their own feet, the more the West insists they're falling. News coverage frames these transitions as reckless coups, yet when tens of thousands fill the streets of Ouagadougou or Bamako waving flags, the cameras look away. And here comes the twist. Western media paints chaos, while the people themselves paint celebration. Two images of the same moment, one designed for foreign investors, the other for local pride. This isn't unique to Africa. In the US, polling shows that when people feel media misrepresents their lives, trust plummets. Many Americans already say they don't see themselves in national coverage. So the gap between lived reality and broadcast narrative isn't just an African problem, it's universal. When humans sense they're being told a story that doesn't match what they see, resentment turns into defiance. A teacher in Niamey shared how his students mocked foreign news clips that labeled their city unstable. "We walk to school every day," one teenager said, "so where's the collapse they keep talking about?" That small laugh carried a sharper truth. People recognize when they're being framed as props in someone else's play. And here's the deeper twist buried inside. The more the West condemns these new leaders, the more credibility they gain at home. What outsiders label dangerous, the streets now call authentic. That reversal of legitimacy is the very thing ECOWAS cannot contain. Because legitimacy, once shifted, rarely shifts back. So the panic says more about the West than about Africa. It reveals fear of losing control, fear of watching the old script burn. And that fear, shouted across headlines, only adds fuel to the fire already rising in the Sahel. The air is heating, the rhythm quickening. And from that rhythm emerges not just resistance, but a blueprint, one that is already being written in real time. The blueprint for the Sahel isn't being drafted in Brussels or Washington. It's being drawn in Bamako, Niamey, and Ouagadougou. The shock is this. Three of the poorest nations on Earth are suddenly rewriting the rules of power, and the world can't look away. On the ground, the alliance of Sahel states is more than a handshake. It's joint defense pacts, intelligence sharing, and resource coordination. Instead of waiting for foreign armies to save them, these nations are testing what it means to defend themselves together. And the twist buried inside, the weaker they were supposed to be, the stronger they're becoming by refusing to play separate games. There's a human rhythm here, too. When people realize they're no longer competing for scraps but building something side by side, behavior shifts. In American life, research shows that communities recovering from disasters often bond more tightly, not less. Strangers share power generators, food, even spare rooms. People act differently when they believe survival depends on cooperation rather than hierarchy. That's the spirit the Sahel is tapping. Cooperation not because it's fashionable, but because the alternative is collapse. A farmer in Burkina Faso recently explained why he supported the new alliance. For years I grew cotton for export and still couldn't feed my children. Now they say we will grow food for us first. That feels like hope. His story isn't statistics. It's the lived proof that policy can alter the texture of daily life. And the deeper twist? What looks like small shifts in agriculture or contracts are actually tectonic moves in dignity. Maybe that's why the fear in Western capitals feels so sharp. Because if nations are written off as fragile can stabilize themselves through unity, what excuse remains for the old system? And you watching, don't you feel that same pull? When people break a pattern long considered permanent, it forces all of us to ask, what other patterns might not be permanent after all? So the Sahel blueprint isn't just paperwork. It's a declaration that Africans will no longer accept survival as their ceiling. The mood has shifted from resignation to defiance, from whispers to drumbeats, and as those drumbeats rise, they carry us to the inevitable question that hangs over every scene we've traced so far. If ECOWAS is gone, what truly takes its place? ECOWAS is not collapsing someday in the future, it has already collapsed. What once called itself the guardian of West Africa is now the ghost haunting its own funeral. The paradox is cruel. An institution built to preserve order ended up proving that real order only comes when people break free. The news is undeniable. 3 nations left, sanctions backfired, youth poured into the streets, and resources once siphoned abroad are being redirected home. But beyond the headlines is the human shift. Millions who once felt ignored are beginning to believe their actions matter. And the twist layered inside, the so-called instability outsiders feared has created more unity on the ground than ECOWAS ever managed with 50 years of summits. Think of it in everyday terms. In America, research shows most people change jobs not just for better pay, but for dignity, wanting their work to feel seen. If dignity is missing, the paycheck alone doesn't hold them. That's exactly what Africans rejected here. ECOWAS offered the paycheck of stability, but not the dignity of sovereignty. And when dignity is denied, people eventually walk out, even if the risk is high. I recall an older man in Ouagadougou telling a journalist, "For the first time since independence, I feel my grandchildren will inherit something stronger than slogans." His words weren't polished, they were plain. But sometimes plain truth carries more force than decades of polished speeches. So we arrive at this point. ECOWAS isn't just over, it's irrelevant. The center of gravity has shifted, from dependency to defiance, from permission to self-determination. And maybe you, watching now, can feel the echo in your own life. How many times have you been told change is impossible until someone finally does it? That's why this story matters beyond Africa. Because when a broken system dies, it reminds all of us that permanence is often just perception. And the final twist? What looks like an ending is actually a beginning. If this breakdown of ECOWAS helped you see the bigger picture, subscribe now and share it with someone who still believes Africa has no choices. And tell me in the comments, what moment in your own life taught you that the system could be challenged? Stay close because the story isn't done. The silence after ECOWAS's collapse is already filling with a louder rhythm, one that will carry us into the next chapter.